Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I started swimming when I was 6 years old. By 9, I spent more time in pools than most kids spent watching TV. My younger brother was 7, and he just decided to try out for the junior lifeguard program at our local beach. Their tryouts weren't easy. You had to tread water for 20 minutes straight, then put on a life jacket while still in the water without touching the bottom. If you couldn't do both, you were out. The tryouts were held in the river, which meant dealing with actual waves, weird currents, and tons of seaweed that wrapped around your legs like slimy ropes. My brother was nervous about it, so I offered to help him practice. We figured the best place to do it would be at the public pool where I trained. It had different sections for different activities, and the recreational pool was perfect because it had a deep end where you couldn't touch the bottom. We showed up on a Saturday afternoon in July. The pool was pretty busy but not packed. The recreational area was split down the middle with lane ropes. One side was marked for free swim, the other for an aerobics class that was just starting up. Before we even got in the water, I made sure to check with the lifeguards. I explained what we needed to do and asked if it was okay to use the free swim side for our practice. The lifeguard on duty that day was this college-age guy who seemed pretty chill about it. He told us that so long we stayed on our side and didn't bother the aerobics class, we were good to go. Perfect. We grabbed a pair of goggles from the communal bin by the pool edge since we needed them to practice the life jacket part. Instead of actual life jackets, we were using goggles because putting them on while treading water is just as tricky. My brother jumped in first and I followed with my swim cap. Since we couldn't replicate actual waves, I filled the cap with water and splashed it on him while he practiced treading. It sounds silly, but it worked pretty well to mimic the conditions he'd faced during the real tryout. We've been doing this for maybe 10 minutes when I noticed one of the ladies from the aerobics class staring at us. She was probably in her 60s with gray hair tucked under a flowered swim cap, and she was using one of those big foam noodle floaties. At first I thought maybe she was just curious about what we were doing, but then she started floating away from her group, heading straight toward us. My brother was in the middle of his timing drill when she got close enough that I had to say something. I asked her to move back to the other side of the pool since we were training and didn't want her to get splashed. She snapped back that she was allowed to be there. She said it was a free side of the pool and it was her right to be there. She added that it wasn't like we owned the pool. I admitted she was right about that, but explained we just didn't want to splash her by accident. She insisted she was staying and that the pool belonged to her just as much as it belonged to us. Technically, she wasn't wrong. The free swim side was open to everyone, but it seemed pretty obvious that she was deliberately coming over to our area when she had the entire other side of the pool with her class. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. My coach sometimes came to this pool and the last thing I needed was to get a reputation for causing trouble. We shifted closer to the wall to give her space. I figured if we stayed near the edge, we could keep splashing to a minimum. My brother went back to treading and I started timing him on my watch. That's when I noticed Karen had been joined by another lady from her class. Now there were 2 of them, and they kept inching closer. By the time my brother hit the 15-minute mark, they were maybe 3 feet away from us. We were practically pressed against the pool wall at this point. I could feel the rough concrete scraping my shoulder every time I moved. This was getting ridiculous. I asked them again if they could please go back to the side reserved for aerobics since we didn't want to splash them. Karen replied that they weren't touching us and there was still plenty of space for us to move. She asked why we didn't just leave them alone. I looked at the wall behind me, then at the 2 women who were now close enough that I could see the pattern on their swimming suits. Plenty of space? Was she serious? I pointed out that while they weren't touching us, they were invading our space. I explained that they had the whole other side of the pool to swim in, but we only had these few feet, so could they please move? Karen refused. She said again that this wasn't our pool and we had no right to be telling them to move. Her voice was getting louder, and I could see people from the aerobics class starting to look over. My face felt hot, and not just from the chlorine. I wanted to say a lot more, but I also knew that losing my temper would only make things worse. I took a deep breath and turned back to my brother. I told him we should just finish the set. Only 5 more minutes to go. I scooped up another cap full of water and dumped it over my brother's head. He sputtered a bit but kept treading. When I was pouring, a tiny bit of water splashed out to the side. I'm talking about maybe a few drops. They landed on Karen's arm. You would have thought I'd thrown a bucket of acid at her. She started screaming for the lifeguard to help her. She was flailing her arms and yelling at the top of her lungs. The lifeguard came running over, blowing his whistle. He looked genuinely concerned, like he thought someone was drowning. Karen shouted that I was trying to drown my brother and both of them. She also accused me of trying to steal goggles. The lifeguard looked at me holding my dripping swim cap. He looked at my brother, who was now trying to put on the borrowed goggles while still treading water. Then he looked at Karen and her friend, who had both dunked themselves underwater and come up sputtering like they just survived a tsunami. The lifeguard told me he was going to need me to leave. I tried to explain that it wasn't true and that my brother and I were just training. Karen called me a liar and demanded I get out. She said they couldn't have me in there because I might go after the kids next. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I hadn't done anything wrong. We'd gotten permission. We'd tried to avoid them. And now I was being kicked out because one drop of water touched this woman's skin. The lifeguard repeated that I needed to put my things away and leave this section of the pool. When I climbed out, I turned back to grab my towel and caught my brother's eye. He looked furious. I'd never seen him that mad before. I shook my head at him, trying to signal that he should just let it go, but he was already climbing out of the pool. I started walking toward the locker room, the lifeguard following behind me. That's when I heard the biggest splash I'd ever heard in my life. I spun around just in time to see the aftermath. My brother had climbed up onto the pool edge and done a full cannonball right next to Karen and her friend. The wave from his jump had completely soaked both of them. Water was dripping from Karen's hair. Her flowered cap was floating away, and her friend's makeup was running down her face. My brother popped up, grinned, climbed out, put the goggles back in the bin, and sprinted toward the locker room before anyone could react. Karen and her friend were screaming and sputtering, trying to wipe the water out of their eyes. I started laughing so hard I almost dropped my towel. The lifeguard looked confused, like he couldn't figure out if he should go after my brother or deal with the two women who were now demanding to speak to a manager. I didn't stick around to find out. I rushed into the locker room where my brother was waiting, and we both burst out laughing. Worth it. I'm living with my sister again at 28. She owned the place, so when her friend asked if she could take in 2 Cocker Spaniels temporarily, she didn't hesitate. That's how Mercy and her 5-month-old puppy came into our lives. Right from the start, I could tell something was off with these dogs. My sister's friend had been upfront about their history. They were purebreds, but not in the good way. Multiple generations of family breeding had left these animals with some serious issues. I've always hated people who think it's acceptable to breed dogs with their own relatives just to keep bloodlines pure. The results speak for themselves, and Mercy and her puppy were living proof. The bathroom situation was bizarre from day one. We had them on a strict feeding schedule twice daily at exact times, with portions measured to their weight and age. You could walk them for 2 solid hours, watch them sniff every tree and fire hydrant in the neighborhood. And the second you brought them back inside, they'd squat and go. Every single time. It was like they had some kind of psychological block about doing their business outdoors. After a week of scrubbing floors constantly, my sister decided to move them to the enclosed porch during the day. The porch was massive, easily the size of a small bedroom, and she set up this nice big dog house for them with blankets and toys. Spring had just started, and the weather was perfect. No cold nights, just mild temperatures. The plan was simple: break the indoor bathroom habit by limiting their access to the house. The routine went like this: morning feeding, 30-minute walk, then onto the porch for 5 hours. My sister would come home at lunch, repeat the whole process, and by evening the dogs came back inside where we could watch them closely. Our dad started helping out too since he lived down the street and had time on his hands. Plus, my sister always had his favorite coffee and cake waiting, which definitely sweetened the deal. We were careful about food and water timing, making sure they had what they needed but not constant access because these dogs had no self-control. Give them unlimited food and water and they gorge themselves sick. The guy across the street started watching us around day 3. Middle-aged, always home with this permanent scowl on his face. Every time we'd walk the dogs to the porch, he'd stand in his window shaking his head like we were committing war crimes. Week 2 started with me blocked in my driveway by an animal control truck. I was already running late for work when this short, overweight woman with thick glasses walked up to the porch. She asked if she could help me, but I was confused since she was the one showing up unannounced. I asked what she meant and she told me she'd received a complaint about animal abuse happening here. I had no idea what she was talking about and told her so. She pointed at the porch and asked why those 2 dogs were being left out there. She didn't even wait for an answer, just walked right through the porch door without permission. Inside, Mercy and her puppy were lounging in their doghouse, chewing on toys, completely content. They had the whole porch to roam around. No chains, no cages. She started yelling about how cruel this was and how dogs kept outside needed access to food and water at all times. I explained that the animals had already been fed and watered, that they weren't chained up, and that I was pretty sure she was confusing the rules for livestock with the rules for pets. I also asked her to show me exactly where the law said what she was claiming. She threatened to take the animals right then and there. I laid it out for her. The dogs were being potty trained, which was why they spent a few hours on the porch during the day before coming back inside at night. And more importantly, she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. Right then, my dad's truck pulled up. He'd been heading over anyway for his morning coffee. My dad looks like a biker, sounds exactly like Christopher Walken, and when he's angry, it's terrifying. He got out of that truck and told her he'd had enough of her nonsense and that she needed to get out of there immediately. He said he was going to talk to her boss and that she had a lot of nerve coming here like this. She practically ran back to her vehicle. My dad knew her supervisor personally, and by the time I got to work an hour late, he'd already sorted everything out. The supervisor confirmed we were doing everything legally and correctly. No abuse, just responsible training. We wouldn't be bothered again. The neighbor looked furious when animal control left without taking the dogs. Him and his wife gave us these nasty stares for the next 2 days. Then my sister came home to an empty porch. The dogs were gone. No gate left open, no explanation. Just vanished. She was devastated and immediately suspected the neighbors, but we had no proof. 5 days later, the dogs magically reappeared on the porch like nothing had happened. And across the street, we saw the most beautiful sight. The neighbor and his wife were on their front lawn screaming at the carpet cleaning company. We could hear every word. The cleaner kept saying he'd be happy to clean the carpets, but they needed to remove the solid waste first. That wasn't his job. The neighbor and his wife were insisting he should do everything. Their voices got louder and angrier when the cleaner packed up and drove away. My dad and I couldn't stop laughing. Those idiots had clearly given the dogs unlimited food and water, probably thinking they were being heroes. What goes in must come out, and these dogs had destroyed their entire house. The carpets were ruined. My sister tried for another month, but nothing worked. The dogs just couldn't be trained. Mercy started getting aggressive, even bit my sister hard enough to draw blood. We had to separate her from the puppy because she kept attacking him. Eventually, my sister's friend took them back and found them a farm to live on, which apparently worked much better. That's when the real entertainment started. The neighbor and his troll-faced wife showed up at our door with printed photos of their destroyed carpets. The images were genuinely disgusting. The wife demanded that my sister pay for the damage and kept shoving the pictures in our faces, asking us to look at what our dogs had done. My dad lost it. He asked them what the heck was wrong with them and called them thieves. He told them they better get out right now. He grabbed the garden hose and started spraying them while they scrambled backward. He kept yelling that they were thieves and asking if they liked getting sprayed. They ran back across the street soaking wet and never spoke to us again. For the next year, they'd shoot us dirty looks whenever our paths crossed, but they kept their distance. My sister got her carpets professionally cleaned, even though they'd never been damaged in the first place. She had her own shampoo machine and kept everything spotless. I've been dealing with my disabilities for most of my life now. I'm 21, and between being deaf, chronically ill, immunosuppressed, and having muscle and joint weakness that makes me a fainting risk, I've learned to navigate the world in my own way. I wear hearing aids, carry a walking stick, and I've accepted that sometimes I just need to sit down wherever I am to avoid hurting myself. It's not ideal, but it's my reality. Most people are understanding when they notice. The pins on my jacket and bag help explain things without me having to repeat myself constantly. But every now and then, I run into someone who decides that my disabilities are somehow their business or worse, that I'm faking it all for attention. Today was one of those days. I was at the train station waiting on a platform with about 10 other people. The train was delayed by nearly half an hour, which had everyone in a foul mood. Rain was coming down steadily, there was nothing to do, and the station still required masks, which nobody was thrilled about, but rules are rules. I'd found a spot to sit, propped my walking stick against the wall nearby, and settled in with one hearing aid in so I could listen to music through an earphone in my other ear. I wasn't bothering anyone, just trying to pass the time. Being deaf means I don't always notice what's happening around me right away. I was in my own world when suddenly something hit the ground right in front of me. I looked down to see a child lying face down at my feet, crying loud enough that even my hearing aid was picking up some of it. Then there was a woman in my face, screaming at me. Her mask was still on, so I couldn't read her lips, and between the crying child and her muffled shouting, I had no idea what she was saying. I told her I was deaf and couldn't understand her with the mask on. I pointed to the pins on my jacket that clearly stated the same thing. It took several minutes of her continuing to shout before she finally pulled her mask down below her chin. She accused me of tripping up her kid. I told her I'd done no such thing. She jabbed her finger toward my walking stick, which was exactly where I'd left it, propped against the wall and completely out of the way. There was no possible way her child had tripped over it. I pointed out that it was against the wall and there was no way her kid fell over it. She asked if I was calling her a liar and insisted she'd just watched her kid run over there and trip over my stupid walking stick. Then she launched into a rant about how entitled teenagers are these days, how we have no respect for our elders, how dare I accuse her of lying, and how I was probably just pretending to be disabled for attention. I've heard variations of this speech before, so I just let her go off while her kid, who had stopped crying the moment nobody was paying attention anymore, got up and started chasing pigeons around the platform. A few people looked our way, but if anyone said anything to her, I didn't hear it. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her why her child was running around on the platform. She said it was because he was bored since they'd been waiting for half an hour and he had nothing to do. I told her he shouldn't be running around on the platform because it was dangerous. She snapped back that I shouldn't tell her how to parent her child. She'd yelled at me, her kid was fine, and I just wanted to go back to my music. I started to put my earphone back in. She demanded I give my son my earphones if I was so concerned about him running around. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't concerned about her child, but I definitely would be concerned if he face planted in front of an oncoming train. Instead, I kept it simple and told her no, I wasn't giving her my earphones. I said a firm goodbye and went to put the earphone back in. She grabbed it right out of my ear. My earphones have a wire. My hearing aid does not. When she yanked the earphone out, she grabbed my hearing aid too, ripping it straight from my ear. It hurt, the kind of sharp, sudden pain that makes your eyes water. Before I could react, she grabbed her kid's hand and took off running with my hearing aid still in her grip. I shouted at her to stop and give it back. I followed her shouting, but now I couldn't hear anything. If she said anything back to me, it was completely lost. When she reached the end of the platform, she turned and ran the other direction. I tried to figure out the best way to stop her without hurting anyone, but she slipped past me before I could decide. Then she did something I never expected. She ran to my walking stick, still propped against the wall, grabbed it, and threw it onto the rails. I saw her mouth moving, saying something to me, but I had no idea what. I completely lost it. I started swearing at her, shouting as loudly as I could because she'd just thrown my expensive walking stick onto the tracks and was still holding a hearing aid that would cost a few £100 to replace if she damaged it. A nice man stepped in and started talking to her. I couldn't hear what was being said, but his presence seemed to at least make her pause. Then someone who worked at the train station arrived, and I nearly cried with relief when she started signing to me. I explained everything in sign language so the woman couldn't interrupt. The station worker's expression grew more and more horrified going on. She immediately took control of the situation. She made the woman hand over my hearing aid, gave me antibacterial wipes to clean it, and had someone retrieve my walking stick from the rails, which delayed the train an additional 10 minutes. Security showed up and escorted the woman out of the station while she screamed and shouted the entire way. She kept yelling that she didn't know it was a hearing aid, which was beside the point because she still would have stolen my property even if it was just an earphone. She also kept insisting I was probably lying about being deaf and disabled, so how was she supposed to know? The station worker told me that the woman had received a lifetime ban from that station. If she lived nearby, she'd have to drive to another town just to catch a train in. If she was just passing through, she'd never be able to use that stop again and would have to get off at the station before or after. The train finally arrived and I boarded with my walking stick and both hearing aids intact. Several passengers who'd witnessed the whole thing gave me sympathetic looks going in to find a seat. It was the worst encounter I'd ever had with an entitled person, but at least it ended with her facing actual results. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.